Hello, everybody. This is the long lost presentation or lecture from this past week. And so I'm posting it now or um, relatively shortly as soon as the technology works with me. It clearly is not my friend this year. And so I'm going to go ahead and do the audio lecture. And it's because it has been posted now, obviously I'm not going to have you just have, an hour and 15 minutes to take it. It'll be open for a while, and should have plenty of time to do this and your quiz by the time it's due. So all of that information will be in the instructions and in the announcement I'll send once I post it. Okay, so today, so motivation theory is very encompassing. Okay, so when we talk about motivation, okay, we really need to focus on specifically what is motivation. And motivation is not just a drive to do something or something you want to do and you keep doing it. It's actually just it is one of those things that you are intrinsically driven to do, but it's not just driven to do. It's if you run into obstacles in your course, then you have enough competence and feeling of self-efficacy that you can get beyond that, get beyond the problems, okay, get over those hurdles successfully. And so it's kind of like, if you believe that you can do that, and if you believe that you can actually get the outcomes that you want, then that is true motivation, because you will do it. And we talked briefly, and we will be talking more about self-efficacy, which is sort of the one construct that is correlated throughout the almost entire world of the motivation concepts and theories. But everything really is tied together and overlapped together. So I want to talk today about self-determination theory. I think this is very applicable theory, and it kind of there's three different parts to it, and it sort of branches off into a lot of different areas as well. But today it'll be a relatively short lecture, and so let's go ahead and do it. So first of all, the questions, as you can see here, are your basic psychological needs being met? So we know that because of Maslow's hierarchy, and if you don't know about Maslow's hierarchy, you can look it up. But Maslow's hierarchy actually states that we do have physical needs, okay, like drinking and eating, that have to be satisfied before we can meet our safety needs. Okay, so kids who go hungry, or kids who don't have a home, kids who live in a home but in a very bad neighborhood where there's a lot of crime. Okay, all of those things have to be satisfied and have to be overcome before you can actually begin to I guess in a short way to say it, to learn, okay, or to become knowing of yourself, to be able to enhance and grow self-esteem and maintain self-esteem and a sense of yourself as far as competence and worthiness, etc. So those are the kind of Maslow hit on those basic physical needs. But there are, since year 2000, we've had some researchers come up with three basic psychological needs that have to be met in order to to have intrinsic motivation. And we know intrinsic motivation will usually lead to very high success, or at the very least the expected outcomes, which of course doesn't have to mean success, because success means different things to different people, but it does lead to our expected success. Okay, so let's see. So, what is the purpose of talking about or studying or doing research on self-determination theory? Well, uh, so the first slide, and this is kind of why, to me, and in the world of education, it is important, because if you look at a recent Gallup poll taken as looking at engagement in school. So if we think about engagement, it has to do with motivation, it has to do with interest. It's not, okay, here's a worksheet and you do it and hand it in, you get a grade. It's, to what extent, is the material in class grabbing your attention and holding your attention and making you want to learn more and maybe to go above and beyond the walls of the classroom and discover more about that topic outside of the classroom. So engaged looks like that. Okay, engaged looks like asking a lot of questions. Engaged looks like a very attentive and ability or willingness to discuss and to do projects and to be active learners. Okay, so that's engagement. And then so you can see the green is engagement. Grade 5 begins with an average of 74% of students are engaged. Okay, and then clearly you just have to look down this graph as students increase in grade level, they decrease in the level of engagement. Okay, so by the time we're in 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, we're at around 32% or 33% engagement, and there's about a third are engaged, a third not engaged, and a third actively disengaged. Okay, so not engaged would just be, okay, showing up to school and just kind of doing what you need to do. Okay, actively disengaged is those students who are truant, who maybe go to class but are very disruptive and always off task. We might even call them amotivated, which we'll talk about later on. And sometimes these students who are actively disengaged are also experiencing a sense of learned helplessness. Okay, so you can see the differences, and you can see compare and contrast between grades 5 and 12, and other research indicate that even in kindergarten it starts out at about 95% engaged, which I think would make most sense to us. So what is happening in school? What is happening outside of school? What is happening in individual students' lives? What factors account for these types of numbers? Because no matter what, over years, over decades, these types of numbers tend to stay relatively similar, in that by the time we are in middle school, high school, we've dropped considerably in engagement. Okay, so in particular, we account for the fact that the presence of intrinsic motivation predictably raises the overall activity, but that it can be suppressed by high intrinsic rewards in turn. So that's one of the things that we think about is, we think about the intrinsic motivation that students have when they're in kindergarten. And then as you get older, you begin to acquire more external rewards. You become to rely on those because, for example, grades. So you have grades, and you have situations at home. You have hormones. You have social things happening that are taking precedence. You are more likely to engage in situations that lead to a sense of sort of low self-worth. Okay, and so the more that we are involved in these types of situations, like extracurricular activities that are highly competitive, classrooms that are highly competitive, parents that are now becoming more disciplinarian for various reasons, right? So now that we're sort of involved, embedded in different contexts where external rewards can actually, determine the amount of fun that we have, or the pleasant or unpleasant consequences, right? So, so that's sort of one reason, or one thing that we can account for as far as why this actually decreases so much. And we could dig deeper, right? We could talk about each single thing, like SES, so socioeconomic status. We could talk about individual psychological health, things like that. So anyway, so that's just some data there. But the self-determination theory was developed by Ryan and Deci in 2000, so it's relatively new, right? So the theory proposes that there are three universal innate psychological needs that we all have, okay? And those would be competence, autonomy, and relatedness, all right? So if these universal needs are not met, then the theory argues, if these universal needs are met, the theory will argue that people will function and grow optimally. Okay, that's we have to do that in order to develop physically and especially psychologically well and well adjusted. Okay, so competence, autonomy, and relatedness. Competence need to be effective in dealing with the environment. Competence would also refer to individuals feeling effective in their interactions with their environment and experience exercising and expressing their capacities. The competence need is related to seeking attainable challenges that match and extend one's capabilities. So competence cannot grow or be sustained if we continue to do easy tasks. Competence is grown and sustained when we are continuously challenging ourselves to a reasonable level, because that's where we gain the feeling of self-worth and the I can do it. Because if we set our goals too high, right, we might fall into that rabbit hole of I'm just not good enough. But if we set attainable goals, then and we are able to reach them with work, then we'll feel pretty darn good. Okay, so competence. Let's see. Autonomy refers to says here need to control the course of your life. So it refers to being the perceived origin or source of your own behavior. It's a source of your own behavior. So contrary to intuition, all right, the autonomy need is not related to independence. It actually refers to an individual's need of feeling in control of their environment and their actions. So some people think when they talk about autonomy, it's like, well, this would be an example of choice or an independence to, choose this route versus that route, independence to choose this project versus that project. Okay, so autonomy, of course, it does involve choice. There's a lot more to it. It's more about the ability to have a sense of control, or almost even a sense of free will about your life. Okay. And then, of course, we have relatedness, and this says need to have a close, affectionate relationship with others. It refers to individuals feeling connected, to caring for and being cared for by others, and to a feeling of belonging. It's related to feeling secure in the company of one's peers. So there's some really powerful words there: feeling belonging and secure in company of one's peers. So humans need all of these basic psychological needs in order to develop intrinsic motivation and to be well-adjusted psychologically from a more of a learning perspective. But this also does apply directly to the workforce and to other contexts. And this theory also should remind you of the Dan Pink video that you watched a week ago, as far as what types of criteria need to be in existence in order for someone to be productive. And some of these were their autonomy, relatedness, mastery, challenges, etc. Okay. Okay. So competence. So let's look at what this really is talking about. So people are motivated to feel worthy or competent. Okay. So we have this innate need as humans to have something called self-worth. And what self-worth is to feel is to feel like we can do it. Okay, it's really tough on us when we are here or when we start believing that we can't do something, right? Some people are even motivated more when they are told they can't do something. So we have this this innate feeling. Okay, it's inherent. It's built into our DNA, and so these feelings of competence and of self-worth and control, or at least perceptions of the control that we have in our lives, will determine the behaviors that ensue. Okay. The problem is that many times, not all the time, but probably all of us at one point at least have perceived ourselves as not competent or not worthy. Okay, whether it's in school or family or friends, etc. There's at one point at least, and I would argue many more points, okay, that we have felt this way. So what happens? So I mentioned that perceptions of control, feelings of worth will lead to certain behaviors. And one of the most common behaviors is something called self-handicapping. This little cartoon says, is it possible that you create conditions for failure to protect your ego and keep yourself safe? Do you create conditions for failure? You would say probably not. Why would I want to fail? But if you are trying to protect your self-worth, we as humans will tend to do anything and make any excuses or blame anything in order to acknowledge, you know what, I'm not that failure. I failed because I did this behavior, I did that behavior, and those behaviors are what we consider to be self-handicapping. So self-handicapping refers to actions or statements we make that allow us to avoid effort or responsibility for potential failures that could damage our self-esteem. All right. So the word itself, self-handicapping, right? So we're actually prohibiting doing things well and building that feeling of competence, aiming for the skies, right? Where instead of wanting to work towards something, we're actually handicapping ourselves. We're actually closing that part off, or that ability. So an example, so it's much more embarrassing and harmful to our self-esteem to put forth effort and fail than it is to self-handicap and have excuses as to why we failed. Okay, so when we put forth effort, we say, oh, we do care about this, like say a test, for example. Do you really care about this because it's going to go in my GPA and maybe it's my last class and I need that GPA to graduate, etc. It's very hard to admit that we tried and we failed. Okay, it's easier to admit that we did something bad, okay, a bad behavior, but we can use that bad behavior to explain why we failed, and that's self-handicapping. So what might be some examples of self-handicapping? Well, one example would be procrastination. Okay, so we've all been guilty of procrastination at least once or twice in our lives. And there's lots of, I think a lot of factors go into why we procrastinate. But from this theory, we procrastinate because we can blame the procrastination instead of ourselves. So if we are studying for a really big test that's important, um, and we are concerned about failing, I think most of us fear failure to some degree. If we're concerned about failing, we might wait to the last minute and study and cram. And then if we fail the test or we don't do nearly as well as we wanted, we don't have to say, oh, I am not, I have, I'm not worthy. I am incompetent. I couldn't do it. I don't have the ability. Okay. Instead, we can say, well, if I hadn't procrastinated, I probably would have done really well on that test. So now I have an excuse. Now I have something to blame on my for my failure or for my potential failure. We come up with these self-handicapping behaviors long before the actual task itself occurs. So what would be some other examples of self-handicapping? Well, there's a few, and I'm going to talk about those. And I also would like you to start kind of generating ideas in your mind about self-handicapping behavior. So another one would be drinking or drugs. Okay, so sometimes when we feel like there is a potential for failure, we might get drunk, get loaded, say the night before the test. Okay. And then when we fail the test, we can say, well, it wasn't me that failed it. Of course, I'm highly capable, but it was because of the alcohol. I'm hungover. So of course, if I hadn't drank, stupid me, why did I do that? Then I would have probably aced the test. Okay. So these excuses, and like I said, if you could try and in your mind just generate some more, I'd like to come back to this in class when I see you and come up with some more examples. Okay, so if we have, so competence involves, again, perceived self-belief in one's ability to perform well in an activity. Here are just some criteria or I suppose characteristics of people who have high perceived competence. So some of the key words with those who have high perceived competence would be expectancy, so high expectancy, self-efficacy, which is very similar to competence, and we'll be talking quite a bit about that later. Self-worth. People with high perceived competence say they feel pride in their work. They feel like they're motivated for learning's sake, not for any external reward. And have mastery goals and are feeling in control of their lives, in control of the trajectory they're taking. Now, I underline mastery goals and controllable because those are at least two different lectures and different theories. So mastery goals would be part of the goal orientation theory. Controllable refers to attribution theory. So we'll talk about those as well. So sort of just on the opposite end of it, right? Oh, I'm sorry. I keep forgetting what I have written. So for example, you might say, I have what I need to succeed. People who perceive themselves as highly competent might say, I know that I can do it. They would say, if I succeed, I feel proud of myself. Okay, so proud sort of indicates that, wow, it came from within. I feel like I did it. I wasn't, doing it for somebody else. I'm very proud of myself. Okay, and you know what? A lot of times we can't even say that. A lot of times we, if we graduate, if we have high honors, or we get into grad school, or we buy a new house, or et cetera, people will say, I'm so proud of you. And we don't always take that as a great compliment, first of all, because pride needs to come from within. And secondly, if we don't feel like it's some big accomplishment, then pride isn't the right word. But it's because we might have low self-esteem low self-worth that we would feel like anything we've done is not worthy of being proud of. Okay, so it kind of works in a cyclical pattern. So those who have low perceived competence. Keywords might be learned helplessness or low worthiness. Avoidant behavior. So if I feel like I'm not going to be good in this class, by good I mean I'm not going to perform well, then an avoidant behavior I might just drop the class, or I might not show up to class. That's avoidant, because who wants to be in a class sitting there for an hour and a half knowing or thinking that you are incompetent in what the instructor is talking about? Okay, so avoidant behaviors. Oh boy, there's a lot of research on shame and guilt, that feeling of shame that you get when you are given your test back and it's F, or it's a lower grade, and that kind of that hotness that goes through your face and kind of gets sweaty, and you just feel ashamed. You don't want anyone to know. Of course, extrinsic motivation. So is it something outside of yourself that is motivating you? Performance goals and uncontrollability. So those last two words refer again to the goal orientation and attribution theory that we'll be talking about later. People who have low perceived competence tend to say things like, I lack the skills to succeed. Okay, that's very certain, right? That doesn't seem to be able to be changed. I don't think I can do that. And if I succeed, I'll feel grateful. So we think about the difference between the word proud and the word grateful. Okay, pride comes from within. Grateful is I feel grateful to somebody or to something. Okay, so these words are really important. Semantics in motivation theory are very important as to what we believe about ourselves. Okay, and then there are 4 sources of competence, senses of competence. So some people are highly competent, and others have a high sense of competence. Others don't, and it can change from context to context, domain from domain, task to task, and the question is why? Okay, why would one person feel highly competent about learning a new learning a new dance move, okay, and another person not feel competent about that at all? So this is there are 4 reasons why this happens, 4 sources, I should say. First of all is the mastery experience, and this is in capital letters because it is the most important. So the first and foremost source of self-efficacy, or the sense of competence, is through mastery experiences. However, nothing is more powerful than having a direct experience of mastery and to increase self-efficacy. Having success, for example, in mastering a task or controlling an environment, will build self-belief in that area, whereas a failure will undermine that efficacy belief. To have a resilient sense of self-efficacy requires experience in overcoming obstacles through effort and perseverance. So these are essentially what I just talked about mastery experiences is probably a really good summary of motivation theory in general. Okay, so we have some key words there: failure, mastering, controlling, self-belief, effort, perseverance, etc. All of those things are highly important keywords. Okay, so if we think if we've done well with this particular dance move before, okay, or we've tried to do it in our living room and we've succeeded, then most likely we're going to have a high level of feeling of competence when someone is trying to teach it to us for the first time. The second one is vicarious learning. So this is the second source of self-efficacy, and it comes from our observation of people around us, especially people we consider to be like role models. Seeing people similar to ourselves succeed by their sustained effort raises our own beliefs that we can also possess the capabilities to master activities needed for success in that area. So if we see somebody that we feel are equals, okay, as far as ability, or someone who we see even as role models, if we can watch them do a task, if we can watch them learn the new dance move, then we're likely to have higher confidence and self-efficacy to do that, okay? The third one is social or verbal persuasion. So this is when we have influential people in our lives, like parents, teachers, coaches, managers. All of these people can strengthen our self-beliefs that we have what it takes to succeed. Okay, you've probably experienced that before. Being persuaded that we possess the capabilities to master certain activities means that we are more likely to put in the effort and sustain it when problems arise. So if you've ever, had a teacher tell you, wow, that, you're really great at that. This is something that I feel you should pursue. I think this would be you could be very successful with this in certain ways. Of course, now we're looking at external sources, but at the same time, this is a strong source of persuasion if it's from somebody that we a source of efficacy. Sorry, if it's coming from someone that we look up to. Okay. So we can be persuaded to have a high level of efficacy or competence towards a particular task. Okay. Sorry. And so the fourth one is physiological or emotional sensations. This is like the state you're in will influence how you judge your self-efficacy. So it's not exactly a source, but it's a state that you're in. So if you, if you think about giving a presentation, right? So thinking about it's about your turn. You're going to go up there. How are you feeling? If you feel nervous, your heart's pounding, your palms are sweaty, you're just kind of shaky. What that does is inform us about how confident we feel to accomplish this task successfully. Okay, so stress, tension, all of these things tell us and are related to poor performance. Okay, so we're positive emotions and states of being when we're called up to give a presentation and we're like, yes, we can do this. We're on our we've practiced, we're ready to go. That is going to give us a boost in our confidence. Okay. And so with self-efficacy, with sense of competence, all of these things, all of these, psychological needs are critical, okay, in order to become a successful person in certain tasks. Okay, it doesn't mean universally you're successful, but all of these things need to be in place before you can be that. Okay, before you can actually have that intrinsic motivation and be driven and persevere and persevere through difficulties, all of those things that many of us struggle with. Okay, but when we know that we need to have these things in place, and that makes it we have just an even better understanding of ourselves. Okay, and then one last thing I just wanted to quickly look at, and I don't want to go into this too much because we are going to talk about this in the next couple of lectures, is that we have talked about intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation, right? But it's not so black and white. So we usually say intrinsic motivation is something that comes externally, like a grade that's motivating us. Intrinsic is something that comes from within, that we just really enjoy doing. But in actuality, there is a continuum of extrinsic motivation, where that the highest level of extrinsic motivation is very close to what we would consider intrinsic motivation. And the lowest area of intrinsic motivation, be external regulation, is extremely close to a motivation, which is non-regulation at all, just non-valuing, not doing anything. Okay, so avoidant completely. There's no motivation regardless of the context or environment or whatever. So this is something that we're going to look at and study in the next few weeks. And other than that, that's all I have for the lecture today. I know I said I was going to keep it short. This is my wheelhouse. This is my favorite topic and my area of research that I do. So of course I went long. But hopefully you will get something out of this in the next few weeks, and the quiz will be up as soon as I can get it up. And I will talk to you soon. Thank you.